A man stands on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. The evening air smells of salt and jasmine. Below him, waves fold against the shore in rhythmic whispers. He sips wine, surrounded by friends and laughter. Normal evening, ordinary moment. Except the crosshairs have already found him. 300 meters offshore, two figures lie motionless in the darkness of a rubber boat, their breathing synchronized with the sea's rhythm. Their rifles are equipped with silencers, their fingers resting on triggers, waiting for a signal that will arrive as a single electronic beep in their earphones. When it comes, two bullets will travel through the Mediterranean night at precisely the same instant, converging on a single point, the head of a man who believed himself untouchable. Muhammad Suleiman, Brigadier General of the Syrian Arab Army, advisor to President Bashar al-Assad, architect of Syria's nuclear ambitions, will drop without a sound, while his guests freeze in confusion. The wine glass will shatter on stone, the laughter will die, and somewhere in Tel Aviv, a file will close with the notation, "Objective accomplished." This is the story of how Israel executed one of its most precise assassinations, a killing so surgical it redefined the boundaries of operational audacity. If you want more stories about Mossad's most daring operations, the invisible wars fought in shadows across continents, and the methods intelligence services use to eliminate threats beyond their borders, subscribe to this channel now. Hit that notification bell, because what you're about to discover will change how you see international conflict forever. Understanding how Muhammad Suleiman died requires understanding who he was and why his elimination became inevitable. Born in 1959 in Damascus, Suleiman grew up in a city where power was measured in proximity to the ruling family and loyalty expressed through silence. His father worked in the military bureaucracy, navigating the complex web of Ba'ath Party politics with the caution of someone who understood that survival depended on invisibility. Young Muhammad inherited this instinct, learning early that ambition without discretion led to disappearance. He watched his father's colleagues rise and vanish with equal speed, their names erased from conversation as thoroughly as if they'd never existed. The lesson was clear: power belonged to those who never appeared to seek it. Suleiman entered military service in 1977, joining the Syrian Arab Army during a period when the institution was being restructured following the October War. He was assigned to artillery units initially, but his superiors quickly noticed something unusual about the quiet young officer. He possessed an analytical mind that approached problems with engineer-like precision. Where others saw obstacles, Suleiman saw systems that could be manipulated, redesigned, exploited. He wrote reports that were models of clarity, stripping complex tactical situations down to their essential variables. His recommendations were rarely dramatic but consistently effective. Within 5 years, he had been transferred to strategic planning, working in offices where decisions were made about weapons procurement and long-term military development. The 1980s were transformative years for Suleiman's career. As Syria aligned itself more closely with the Soviet Union, he became involved in managing relationships with foreign arms suppliers. He traveled to Moscow, Prague, and Pyongyang, negotiating deals for tanks, aircraft, and missile systems. These trips taught him the language of international weapons trade, the coded conversations, the offshore accounts, the shell companies that moved money without leaving trails authorities could follow. He learned that the most valuable skill in this world wasn't technical expertise, but the ability to build trust across cultures while revealing nothing about yourself. His reputation grew quietly. Defense contractors began requesting him specifically for negotiations. He was known as someone who delivered what he promised and never spoke about what he knew. By the 1990s, Suleiman had become indispensable to Syria's military leadership. President Hafez al-Assad, Bashar's father, recognized the value of officers who operated effectively without seeking public recognition. Suleiman was promoted to Brigadier General and given the title Special Presidential Advisor for Arms Procurement and Strategic Weapons. The position carried no public profile, but immense behind-the-scenes influence. He controlled access to Syria's most sensitive military programs, coordinating between the presidential palace, intelligence services, and foreign suppliers. His office in Damascus was located in an unmarked building near the Defense Ministry, accessible only through security checkpoints that recognized faces rather than credentials. Inside, Suleiman maintained files on every major weapons system Syria possessed or sought to acquire. Each document encrypted and compartmentalized so that no single person besides him understood the full scope of his operations. Colleagues described him as unnervingly disciplined. He arrived at his office before dawn and left after dark, maintaining routines so consistent they became invisible through repetition. He rarely smiled, speaking in measured tones that suggested careful consideration of every word. His personal life was almost non-existent. He never married, maintained few friendships, and spent most evenings alone, reviewing classified reports. Those who worked with him noted his obsessive attention to detail. He checked documents multiple times, verified sources independently, and refused to rely on single points of information. This paranoia was justified. In Syria's intelligence apparatus, trust was a luxury that could prove fatal. Suleiman survived by trusting no one completely and ensuring that his value to the regime remained irreplaceable. His most significant transformation occurred in the early 2000s, when Syria began exploring nuclear capabilities. The program was born from strategic calculation rather than ideological fervor. Surrounded by hostile neighbors, facing an increasingly aggressive Israel, and watching as regional powers developed their own nuclear arsenals, Syrian leadership concluded that acquiring atomic weapons was a matter of survival. The decision to pursue this path was made in absolute secrecy, discussed only among a tiny circle that included President Bashar al-Assad, his brother Maher, a handful of senior generals, and Muhammad Suleiman. For Suleiman, this represented the ultimate test of his career, managing a program so sensitive that even its existence had to remain hidden from most of Syria's government. The Syrian nuclear project, centered around a facility at Al-Kibar in the Deir ez-Zor region, required coordination with North Korea, which provided technical expertise and reactor designs. Suleiman became the architect of this collaboration, traveling repeatedly to Pyongyang to negotiate terms and oversee technology transfers. He established communication protocols using encrypted satellite phones and coded language that disguised nuclear terminology as agricultural development. Payments were routed through banks in China and Singapore, layered through multiple shell companies to prevent intelligence agencies from tracing the money back to its source. The reactor itself was built to resemble a conventional industrial facility, its external architecture deliberately mundane to avoid attracting attention from satellite surveillance. But Suleiman's role extended beyond the nuclear program. He also served as Syria's primary liaison with Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant organization that functioned as an Iranian proxy in the region. This connection made him invaluable to Tehran, which relied on Syria as a corridor for moving weapons and personnel into Lebanon. Suleiman coordinated shipments of advanced missiles, including systems capable of striking deep into Israeli territory. He arranged meetings between Hezbollah commanders and Iranian Revolutionary Guard officers, hosting them in secure locations around Damascus, where discussions could occur without surveillance. His ability to manage these relationships while maintaining operational security made him one of the most connected figures in the axis of resistance that linked Tehran, Damascus, and Beirut. Israeli intelligence had been tracking Suleiman since the late 1990s, but he remained a secondary concern until evidence emerged of Syria's nuclear ambitions. In 2006, Mossad operatives obtained photographs from inside the Al-Kibar facility, images that showed unmistakable signs of reactor construction. The discovery triggered alarm at the highest levels of Israeli government. A nuclear-armed Syria represented an existential threat that could not be tolerated. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert authorized Operation Orchard, an airstrike designed to destroy the reactor before it became operational. On September 6, 2007, Israeli F-15 and F-16 jets crossed into Syrian airspace and obliterated the facility with precision-guided munitions. The attack lasted minutes, leaving nothing but rubble where the reactor had stood. Syria's response was muted publicly, denying the facility had any nuclear purpose and refusing to allow international inspectors access to the site. But internally, the strike triggered a crisis. President Assad demanded accountability, wanting to know how such a catastrophic intelligence failure had occurred. Suleiman, as the program's architect, faced intense scrutiny. Some within the regime viewed him as a liability, someone whose connections and knowledge made him dangerous if he ever decided to defect or talk. Others argued that eliminating him would send the wrong message, suggesting Syria had something to hide. The debate raged for months while Suleiman continued his work, aware that his position had become precarious. He began taking precautions, varying his routes, limiting his public appearances, and spending more time at his beach villa in Tartus, away from the scrutiny of Damascus. For Israel, Suleiman's continued existence represented unfinished business. Destroying the reactor had eliminated an immediate threat, but the man who built it remained operational, capable of initiating new programs or sharing his expertise with other hostile actors. Within Mossad and Israeli military intelligence, a consensus emerged. Suleiman had to be eliminated. The decision was formalized in early 2008 when Prime Minister Olmert authorized what would become one of the most audacious assassination operations in Israeli history. The mission was assigned to Syrian 13, Israel's elite naval commando unit, known for operations requiring surgical precision and absolute deniability. Their task was clear: kill Muhammad Suleiman in a manner that would demonstrate Israel's reach while leaving no traceable evidence linking them to the operation. Planning began immediately, with intelligence officers compiling detailed profiles of Suleiman's routines, security arrangements, and vulnerabilities. Surveillance teams operated inside Syria, using assets recruited over years of penetration operations. They tracked Suleiman's movements between Damascus and Tartus, noting patterns in his behavior. The beach villa emerged as the optimal target location. Unlike his Damascus office, which was surrounded by layers of security, the villa offered relative isolation. Suleiman visited regularly during summer months, using the location to host private dinners with close associates. The villa sat directly on the Mediterranean coast, its terrace overlooking water that stretched unbroken to the horizon. This geography provided Syrian 13 with a natural approach route, the sea itself. The operational concept was elegant in its simplicity. A small team would approach Suleiman's villa by sea, using an inflatable boat, position themselves at optimal firing distance, wait for the target to appear on his terrace, and eliminate him with precision rifle fire before vanishing into the darkness. The entire operation would last minutes, executed with such speed that Syrian security forces would have no time to respond. The challenge lay in the details, calculating exact distances for accurate long-range shooting, accounting for wind conditions over water, ensuring absolute silence to avoid alerting guards, and coordinating extraction without leaving any physical evidence behind. Every variable had to be controlled, every contingency planned, because a single mistake would transform a covert assassination into an international incident that could trigger regional war. Syrian 13 began preparing in early summer 2008. The unit's snipers, already among the most skilled marksmen in Israeli military service, underwent additional training specifically designed for maritime shooting conditions. They practiced firing from unstable platforms that mimic the motion of boats on water, learning to compensate for the constant movement beneath them. They studied how Mediterranean winds affected bullet trajectories at different times of day, memorizing patterns that would inform their shooting calculations. They rehearsed the entire operation repeatedly at a secure facility along Israel's coast, using a mock-up of Suleiman's villa built from satellite imagery and reconnaissance photographs. Every detail was replicated: the terrace's dimensions, the placement of furniture, the angles of sightlines from various offshore positions. The rehearsals continued until the team could execute the operation blindfolded, their movements becoming muscle memory that required no conscious thought. Intelligence gathering intensified as the operation's timeline compressed. Mossad assets inside Syria reported on Suleiman's schedule, confirming that he planned to spend the first weekend of August at his Tartus villa. Electronic surveillance intercepted phone conversations, in which he discussed hosting a dinner party on the evening of August 1st, inviting several close friends and associates. This intelligence provided the operational window: a known date, a confirmed location, and a predictable routine that would place Suleiman exactly where the snipers needed him to be. Final authorization came through encrypted channels in late July. Prime Minister Olmert signed off on the operation after receiving assurances from military planners that success probability exceeded 90% and that extraction protocols would ensure the team's safe return. The mission was designated Operation Sunshade, a bureaucratic code name that revealed nothing about its lethal purpose. On the evening of July 31st, 2008, A small Israeli naval vessel departed from a secure base along the Mediterranean coast. Aboard were 4 members of Shaytet 13, 2 snipers, a spotter, and a communications specialist. They carried modified M24 rifles, equipped with advanced optics and suppressors that would muffle muzzle blasts to near silence. The weapons had been zeroed for 300-meter shots under maritime conditions, their scopes calibrated to account for humidity and temperature. Each sniper had prepared their own ammunition, hand-loading rounds with precision to ensure consistent ballistics. They wore black wetsuits and carried minimal equipment: rifles, night vision devices, GPS units, and waterproof communication gear. Their faces were darkened with camouflage paint. No identification, no insignia, nothing that could link them to Israel if something went catastrophically wrong. The vessel traveled through international waters, maintaining radio silence and avoiding all commercial shipping lanes. As night fell, the team transferred to an inflatable Zodiac boat, equipped with an electric motor that produced almost no sound. They launched 20 kilometers from the Syrian coast, timing their approach to coincide with Suleiman's expected appearance on his terrace. The sea was calm, a rare gift that simplified shooting calculations. The moon hung low on the horizon, providing just enough ambient light for navigation, while keeping them invisible to anyone watching from shore. They moved slowly, the electric motor pushing them forward at a speed that barely disturbed the water's surface. Behind them, the larger vessel turned back toward Israeli waters, disappearing into darkness. The commandos were now alone, committed to a mission from which there would be no support if complications arose. As they approached Syrian territorial waters, the team's tension crystallized into focused calm. This was the psychological state they had trained to achieve: complete presence without anxiety, awareness without distraction. The spotter monitored their GPS position, guiding the boat to coordinates calculated during planning sessions. At precisely 300 meters from Suleiman's villa, they cut the motor and allowed the boat to drift into position. The snipers assumed firing stances, bracing their rifles against the boat's rubberized edge, while the spotter used a laser rangefinder to confirm the exact distance. 297 meters. Wind speed, negligible. Temperature, 24 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 68%. All variables were documented and factored into the shooting solution. The terrace was visible through their scopes, illuminated by soft lights that spilled from the villa's interior. They could see figures moving inside, shadows passing behind glass doors. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited for Suleiman to appear. The commandos controlled their breathing, slowing their heart rates to minimize any tremor that might affect accuracy. They became extensions of their weapons, motionless except for the minute adjustments needed to track the terrace through their scopes. The Mediterranean lapped gently against the boat's sides, a sound so soft it barely registered. Above them, stars emerged as the last traces of twilight faded. The night was perfect for killing, dark enough to conceal their presence, but clear enough for precision shooting. At approximately 9:45 p.m., the terrace doors opened. Muhammad Suleiman stepped outside, wine glass in hand, moving toward the stone railing that overlooked the sea. He was accompanied by 2 guests who followed him onto the terrace, their voices carrying faintly across the water. The spotter whispered confirmation into his radio. Target acquired. The snipers aligned their crosshairs, each focusing on Suleiman's head. Shooting doctrine called for simultaneous fire to ensure the target was neutralized instantly, preventing any reaction that might allow him to seek cover. They synchronized their breathing, waiting for the moment when their exhales aligned, when their bodies achieved perfect stillness. The spotter counted down in whispered Hebrew. 3, 2, 1. Execute. 2 rifles fired as one, their suppressors reducing the sound to soft coughs that wouldn't carry beyond a few meters. The bullets traveled through Mediterranean air at over 2,000 feet per second, covering 300 meters in less than half a second. Both rounds struck Suleiman's head simultaneously, the impact dropping him instantly. He collapsed against the railing and then slid to the terrace floor, his wineglass shattering on stone. His guests froze for a single heartbeat before comprehending what had happened. Their screams erupted into the night as they dropped to the terrace, seeking cover from an attack whose source they couldn't identify. The commandos didn't wait to observe the aftermath. The moment the shots were confirmed on target, they restarted the electric motor and began their withdrawal. They moved at maximum speed now, racing away from the Syrian coast while maintaining a heading that would take them into international waters. Behind them, chaos erupted at the villa. Guards rushed onto the terrace, shouting orders and scanning the darkness for threats they couldn't see. Someone attempted to render aid to Suleiman, but the wounds were instantly fatal. Both bullets had struck within millimeters of each other, penetrating his skull and destroying critical brain tissue. He was dead before his body hit the ground, killed so quickly that consciousness never registered the impact. Within minutes, Syrian security forces were mobilizing, but they had no idea where to look. The attack had come from the sea, but the shooters had left no trace. No boats visible on radar, no engine sounds detected. Nothing but the evidence of precision violence that seemed to materialize from the Mediterranean itself. The Shayetet 13 team maintained radio silence during their withdrawal, communicating only through brief coded signals that confirmed their status. They traveled 15 kilometers before the electric motor was replaced by a more powerful engine that accelerated their escape. 20 kilometers from the Syrian coast, they rendezvoused with the waiting Israeli vessel, which hauled the Zodiac aboard and immediately turned toward home waters. The entire operation, from initial approach to extraction, had lasted less than 4 hours. By midnight, the commandos were aboard the vessel, stripping off their wetsuits and securing their weapons. No celebration, no congratulations, just the quiet professionalism of soldiers who had done exactly what they were trained to do. The rifles were disassembled and stored in waterproof cases. The boat was deflated and stowed. Every piece of equipment was inventoried to ensure nothing had been left behind at the operational site. As dawn broke over the Mediterranean, the team arrived at their base in Israel. They were debriefed immediately, recounting every detail of the operation, while intelligence officers documented their observations. Had there been any complications? No. Had they been detected during approach or withdrawal? No indication of it. Were they confident both shots had struck the target? Absolutely certain. The debriefing concluded with confirmation that Operation Sunshade had achieved its objective without compromise. Muhammad Suleiman was dead, eliminated with surgical precision that demonstrated Israel's ability to reach targets anywhere within range of its maritime commandos. The operation would be classified at the highest levels, its details known only to a small circle of military and political leadership. Officially, Israel would neither confirm nor deny involvement. But among intelligence professionals worldwide, the message was unmistakable. Certain individuals could be eliminated whenever and wherever Israel deemed necessary. Syrian state media reported Suleiman's death the following morning, describing it as an assassination carried out by unknown gunmen. The initial reports were vague, offering few details about how the attack had occurred. This vagueness reflected the embarrassment Syrian authorities felt about the security failure. One of their most protected officials had been killed at his private residence, eliminated by attackers who had approached undetected and escaped without trace. President Assad ordered an immediate investigation, but the inquiry quickly stalled. There were no witnesses beyond the guests on the terrace, who could only describe hearing glass shatter and seeing Suleiman fall. Forensic examination of the terrace recovered bullet fragments consistent with high-velocity rifle rounds fired from long range. The trajectory analysis pointed toward the sea, but by the time investigators reached this conclusion, any evidence of the attacker's presence had long since dispersed. Within Damascus, speculation erupted about who was responsible. Some Syrian officials blamed Israel immediately, citing Suleiman's role in the nuclear program and his connections to Hezbollah as obvious motives. Others suggested internal Syrian politics might be involved, noting that Suleiman had accumulated enemies within the regime who saw him as dangerously knowledgeable and potentially disloyal. A few even whispered about Iranian involvement, theorizing that Tehran might have eliminated Suleiman to prevent him from becoming a liability after the Al-Kibar reactor's destruction. The confusion served Israel's purposes perfectly. By creating multiple plausible explanations for the assassination, Syrian authorities couldn't focus their response on any single enemy. The ambiguity became its own form of strategic advantage, leaving Syria uncertain about how to retaliate or even whom to blame officially. International media coverage was limited initially, with most outlets treating Suleiman's death as a minor story buried in Middle East news sections. The Syrian government's reluctance to provide details contributed to this low profile, as did the general lack of public information about who Suleiman was and what he did. He had spent his career operating in shadows, avoiding publicity and maintaining anonymity even among Syria's military elite. This anonymity meant his death generated little immediate interest outside intelligence circles. But for those who understood his significance, the assassination represented a major escalation in Israel's shadow war against its enemies. It demonstrated that geographic proximity no longer protected targets, that Israel could strike anywhere along the Mediterranean coast with impunity, and that even the most carefully guarded officials remained vulnerable to operations executed with sufficient skill and determination. The true confirmation of Israeli involvement came 7 years later through leaked documents obtained by Edward Snowden and published in international media. The classified files, originating from American intelligence intercepts, contained communications between Israeli operatives discussing the operation in coded language that analysts had subsequently decoded. One document explicitly stated that Israeli naval commandos had eliminated Suleiman using precision rifle fire from a boat positioned 300 meters offshore. The leak provided definitive proof of what intelligence professionals had suspected since 2008, that Israel had executed one of the most audacious assassinations in modern covert warfare, striking deep inside Syrian territory with an operation that left Syrian security forces completely blindsided. The revelation triggered diplomatic protests from Damascus, but by 2015, the regional landscape had transformed so dramatically that Suleiman's assassination seemed almost irrelevant. Syria was engulfed in civil war, its government fighting for survival against multiple rebel factions and ISIS. President Assad had far more immediate concerns than seeking justice for a general killed 7 years earlier. The Syrian government issued perfunctory statements condemning Israel and demanding international accountability. But these protests dissolved into the noise of a conflict that had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Suleiman's death became a footnote to larger catastrophes, remembered primarily by intelligence historians studying the evolution of targeted killing operations. For Israel, the operation represented a template that would be refined and repeated in subsequent years. The Tartus assassination demonstrated that maritime approaches offered unique advantages for surgical strikes against coastal targets. The sea provided natural concealment, simplified extraction, and created ambiguity about the attack's origin. These lessons informed later operations, including strikes against weapons convoys in Syria and assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists who could be reached through similar methodologies. Shayetet 13's success at Tartus elevated the unit's status within Israeli military hierarchy, confirming that special operations forces could achieve strategic objectives that conventional military power couldn't accomplish. The operation also reinforced Israel's doctrine of preemptive elimination. Better to kill adversaries before they became existential threats than to wait for conflict to escalate beyond control. The psychological impact of Suleiman's assassination extended beyond Syria. For officials across the Middle East involved in programs hostile to Israel, the message was unmistakable. Distance provided no protection, security measures could be circumvented, and Israel possessed both the capability and willingness to reach anyone it deemed a threat. Iranian nuclear scientists became noticeably more cautious, varying their routines and increasing their security details. Hezbollah commanders in Lebanon reduced their public appearances and moved between safe houses with increased frequency. The invisible war being fought across the region had entered a new phase, one where assassination had become normalized as a tool of statecraft, accepted by all sides as inevitable rather than exceptional. Within Mossad and Israeli military intelligence, analysts studied the operation obsessively, documenting every aspect to extract lessons for future missions. What had worked perfectly? The maritime approach, the long-range precision shooting, the rapid extraction. What could be improved? Communication protocols during withdrawal, backup plans if weather conditions had been unfavorable, contingencies if Suleiman had remained inside the villa. These assessments fed into training programs that prepared new generations of operatives for similar missions. The institutional knowledge accumulated through decades of targeted killings became a strategic asset, allowing Israel to execute operations with a precision that few other nations could match. The ethical dimensions of Suleiman's assassination, like those of all targeted killings, remain deeply contested. Israeli officials justified the operation as legitimate self-defense, arguing that Suleiman's role in Syria's nuclear program and support for Hezbollah made him a combatant rather than a civilian. By this logic, killing him was no different than destroying a weapons facility or eliminating a military commander during wartime. Critics countered that assassinations outside active combat zones violated international law, regardless of the target's activities. They argued that Israel's policy of targeted killing set dangerous precedents, normalizing extrajudicial executions and undermining the legal frameworks meant to constrain state violence. The debate continued without resolution, reflecting deeper disagreements about sovereignty, security, and the limits of permissible force in international relations. For the commandos who executed the operation, the assassination was simply another mission completed according to orders. They had trained for years to perform exactly this kind of operation, developing skills that allowed them to kill with precision and withdraw without detection. The moral weight of their actions was absorbed by the institutional machinery that authorized and directed their violence. They didn't decide who should die, only how to accomplish the deaths that political and military leadership deemed necessary. This compartmentalization allowed them to function without the psychological burden that might otherwise make such operations impossible. They were tools, highly trained and exceptionally effective, but tools nonetheless in a system where decisions about life and death were made by others in offices far from the operational theater. Muhammad Suleiman's legacy exists in fragments scattered across classified files and fading memories. His contributions to Syria's nuclear program died with him, the knowledge he possessed about reactor construction and weapons development vanishing in the instant 2 bullets struck his skull. His networks connecting Damascus to Pyongyang and Tehran were disrupted but not destroyed, eventually rebuilt by others who learned from his methods while avoiding his fate. His assassination became a case study, taught in intelligence training programs worldwide, analyzed for its technical brilliance and strategic impact. But the man himself, his motivations and beliefs, his private thoughts and personal fears, remain unknowable. He lived in shadows and died in them, leaving behind only the outline of a life devoted to programs and purposes that history would judge harshly. The villa in Tartus still stands, though it has changed hands multiple times since 2008. The terrace where Suleiman died has been renovated, the bloodstains long since scrubbed away, the bullet impacts and the stone railing repaired. New owners use the space to watch Mediterranean sunsets, unaware of the violence that occurred there. The sea beyond continues its eternal rhythm, waves folding against the shore exactly as they did the night Israeli commandos positioned themselves 300 meters offshore and ended a man's life with 2 precisely aimed shots. Nothing marks the location as historically significant, because that's how perfection looks in the world of covert operations. Ordinary, unremarkable, leaving no trace that anything extraordinary ever occurred. The operation succeeded not just in eliminating its target, but in vanishing so completely from visible history that only specialists remember it happened at all.